Howard County Poetry and Literature Society's Lucille Clifton Reading Series. I'm Susan Thornton Hobby, a board member and the school liaison for the Writer in Residence program. In a few minutes, we will feast on poetry. There'll be curry and bechamel and empanadas and beans, but not all in the same poem or pot. Tonight's reading celebrates poet Lucille Clifton, who served as our long-term artistic advisor and our very first writer in residence. For 30 years, HoCoPoLitSo has brought incredible writers into the classrooms in Howard County's high schools, including writers such as Lee Young Lee, E. Ethelbert Miller, and Maryland's current poet laureate, Grace Cavalieri. We are grateful for the presence tonight of two illustrious poets who served in years past as HoCoPoLitSo's writers in residence, Terry Ellen Cross Davis and Jenny O'Grady. Welcome. Long funded by the Jim and Patty Rouse Charitable Foundation, the Writer in Residence program has been sponsored for the last 2 years by Dr. Lillian Bowder. Longtime supporter of the Columbia Film Society is tonight represented by Bob Keller. We're grateful for all the generous support. Howard County educators were specially invited to this event, and we welcome all the teachers who are giving their utmost in the county's classrooms. We so appreciate your labors and know that your work has been a challenge over the last 18 months. To honor the teachers in our audience, we offer a special guest with a pep talk. Here's Taylor Molly, slam poet champion and the author of What Teachers Make and many other poems.
Hi, it's Taylor Molly from my home office in Brooklyn. You might know me from such poems as What Teachers Make. And no, that's probably about it. It's another day. It's another day for me to write a poem about what I used to do, which is what you still do on the front lines, teaching. I am still a teacher in many ways, but not the way I used to be. Anyway, that's my own burden that I deal with every day. As a former HoCoPoLitSo guest, which I sometimes like to say HoCoPoLitSo, from 2015, I wanted to give you some words of encouragement for the year, for writing projects, for getting back into the classroom. And I thought I would read you the opening lines of a children's book that I'm writing called The Teachers I Loved Best. It's going to probably come out in 2023. But anyway, here are the opening lines of this. It goes like this. Easy teachers who gave even easier tests are not the teachers I loved best. No, I loved the teachers who made me work hard in the classroom, the science lab, the theater, and the schoolyard. Those are the teachers who stand out from the rest, and those are the teachers who I loved best. There's another secret in there. A little buried in the poem is that at the heart of all the teachers I loved best are the ones who I knew loved me. They loved me back. I loved them because I knew they wanted the best for me. So it is not important for your students to like you. What is important is that you love them, especially if you don't like them. Especially if you don't like them. Those are the most important ones to love. All right, good luck. Have a great year. Shana.
So, to help fuel all the teachers and readers and literature lovers out there, we're throwing a poetry potluck tonight. National Poet Laureate Joy Harjo, who read for HoCoPoLitSo in 2005, wrote a poem that I'd like to invoke to set tonight's mood. The title is Perhaps the World Ends Here, and it imagines the world beginning at a kitchen table where friends and family are gathered to talk and to listen, and most of all, to eat. She writes, at this table, we sing with joy, with sorrow. We pray of suffering and remorse. We give thanks. Thank you for joining us for tonight's poetry. We have 4 writers with us tonight, all of whom were or are writers in residence, all of whom are award-winning poets, all of whom are great cooks. Our poetry feast begins with Alan King and continues with Naomi Ayala, who is this year's writer in residence, then Stephen Leyva, who was last year's writer in residence, and finishes up with Sandra Beasley.
Thank you, Susan, and thank you, HoCoPoLitSo, for having us. And to all of you joining us this evening, welcome. So This event is about food. So you'll see in the two poems that I'm going to read the different roles that food plays. So I'll start with a poem for my parents. The Hostess. She starts with oil. She simmers garlic before adding curry. Got to cook it real good, she says, or else it'll mess up your stomach. Mom adds sugar to blacken the already dark tint left on what pops and sizzles, what mixes in the meat, steaming in a bubbling bath of cumin, turmeric, and cayenne pepper. Mom doesn't cook curry a lot, just on days when dad comes home tired, when each day's an opponent that leaves him bruised like the bags of fruit he brings her. One time, mom wrapped her arms around his neck, and dad said, "You only love me for my mangoes." They both laughed when mom said, "You gotta bring mangoes home more often." He'd tell mom about the days when his drill burned out, when his truck got a flat in the rain or didn't start, when days seemed to plot against him as if he was a fighter past his prime, unwilling to lie down and throw the match. And there's mom's curry lingering in every room, opening the house for his return. Dad enters her scent that calls him to the kitchen, ready to put back what the ring takes out of him. Okay, this second poem is for my wife, and oftentimes she's had to learn like to not try to engage me when I'm hungry. So this is a poem about one of those moments. I wanted bananas, a bunch of them, spooned body to body like small yellow kayaks. So I missed what you said about the war in Libya. When you say Gaddafi, I think of how they spoil if they sit too long on their wicker thrones. We're in my car listening to WTOP. We pass a Spanish market that calls what I love plátanos. Just saying plata, my tongue snaps like the slingshot's elastic strip, hurling A's like stones. You complain about the weak radio signal. I could nod and punctuate your frustrations with hums, as if I'm listening, as if my head weren't full of hunger's SOS. I could pretend that the radio static is annoying, as if the sizzling sound it makes doesn't have me thinking of sweet, chunky rumba slices frying in my mother's skillet, or plantains boiled whole with dashing, dumplings, and potatoes to eat with saltfish and coconut bake, plates and plates of large bananas, edible boomerangs, nature's golden sugar-filled tusk, the moon's waning frown or waxing smile. All right. So next up, it is my honor to introduce Naomi Ayala. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. It's an honor to be here to share our love of food and poetry with such a great group of poets. I'm going to start with a poem in Spanish and follow it immediately with the translation. Restaurante Santa Rosa, a Vanessa Bustos. En los últimos 12 días, el sol no ha pasado por los ventanales de Santa Rosa y nadie se ríe como nos reíamos antes. La radiola está ensimismada. La radiola está ensimismada, el pulpo frío, las mazorcas de maíz en su ensueño de verano. Algunos hombres se dan cerveza solos y fuman. Uno reniega el embarazo de su novia, arando días que guardan secretos. Y una mujer quiere cambiarse el nombre a murmullo, a ola, a viento. Las plantas plásticas se ríen del clorofilo, le tiran besitos al cielo encantaranoblado. 3 encendedores se encienden de una vez cerca del salero a quien le pesan tantos granitos de arroz. Y cómo pasan los peatones afuera, tan lejos de aquí y tan cerca, sin pensar en el cielo quien, queriendo cambiar de historia, se cuesta morir entre nosotros. Santa Rosa Restaurant for Vanessa Bustos. In the past 12 days, the sun has not come through the window panes of Santa Rosa, and no one laughs the way we used to. The jukebox is engrossed in her thoughts, the octopus and cobs of corn in their daydream of summer. Some men drink their beers alone and smoke. One renounces his lover's pregnancy, plowing through days of well-kept secrets. And a woman wants to change her name to whisper, wave, wind. The plastic plants mock chlorophyll, blow little kisses to the overcast sky. 3 cigarette lighters spark up at once near a salt shaker whose tiny grains of rice weigh him down. And how pedestrians pass by outside so far from here and so close without a thought about the sky who, wanting to change his history, lies down to die among us. And I'm going to close this with this poem in English called Tu Tamales. I would give you everything I have, and today that is a little bit of sun and 2 tamales. I would make you a chipotle sauce with songs of back home. Use the cilantro of my words to have a little green to chew on. Before the corn husks dry again, I would make you a little love in the shape of a flower constantly blooming. These hands I keep for myself, though. They belong to the world now. Everything else you can have, my pillow, my jug of water, this poem, the love I'll have for your hands when they look at me, past the self I am in front of them, looking past the both of us. Thank you. And now we'll have the honor to hear poems from Stephen Leyva.
Thank you so much, Naomi. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you today. Thank you, HoCoPoLitSo. I'm going to read a poem that reminds me that both poems and recipes, both are kind of like parades of language. It's a poem called Fat. Fat. Tuesday, much glitter filling the gutter. Parade through some Zulu, carnival king, beloved drunk with his drunk mother, river teasing the city with its obesity. The whole damn Gulf dyed purple as a bruise on a thigh, backside round as hallelujah in the mouth, handsome cab, good whiskey poured in the ear, a dance reduced to the bend in a beau's wrist that says yes, blessed black eye given to the bigot. Sea of plastic beads, revelry after the club closes, the way the quarters club the air with music, beat on a beat on a beat. Gumbo pot filled to the top, po' boy longer than your arm. Mima's house on a cinder block, quatrain, darkness fat as ham hock. This new world fleur-de-lis stamped on the back of fool's gold, easy gone big. A saint with the other saints amassing at the only matins that matter. The trumpet player bending a minor scale till it's penitent, then making sin. That yat some speak, an unteachable accent, dancing a second line across the teeth. The garrulous polyglot gulf, seductive as the Aegean, triptychs in Zydeco's baseline long enough to write the epics that won't console, a lip smack left cold on a stranger's breast, or a field of Elysium, but really just a street in New Orleans, along bones layered with neighborhood fat and hungry bulldozers. A parade down to Lent, asking of God What's he giving up? That time he said, "This city," and everyone laughed, lifting their feathered masks to kiss the night that ends in Wednesday's ash. I'm going to read another poem that is inspired by a little bit of theater. I think cooks in the kitchen are a little theatrical, recipes are a little theatrical. So here's a poem called Ethel Cooking Bechamel. Epigraph. I'm not going to tell you what it is till after you done cooked it. Aunt Ethel, The Colored Museum, by Charles C. Wolfe. 1. Not the roux as fact, but the new white roux. A rhizome of Tabasco in the pan. Gas stove lit, butter and milk blended like funk slew in a dance hall. Low heat for centuries. Cook the books, all of it. This is from scratch in memory. Take it like a slow drag. Sauce won't brown when whipped gradually or quick. Give yourself some time. Cream won't sag. Let's make some diabetics. Cut that sugar bag, drop it hot. Add some bay leaf, San Fran, or Chesapeake. In exile, like this aunt of aunties, hun, talk that fat-free talk. Canned isolation, complexion, just a touch, a dash of fetish. Child can't put too much. 2. But the truth is, an old married couple left alone resolves nothing. Just keep kicking each other in their sleep. Recipes and cooks get this way. Cities and citizens get this way. Shit, God and all creation too. I recall getting kicked out the kitchen, but my sister didn't. Worse than a whooping where you pulled the switch yourself. Now these gaps I got in the cookbook. Filet gumbo, no. Old-fashioned red beans, no. Bunch of worn-down dishes whipped up on the cheap. Can still fry a bird golden and say for grace, the kingdom of heaven is at hand with a straight face. Bite and believe again. 3, naturally. Squeeze the tail and suck the fat from the head, then throw the shell away. What could be better than the whole damn day, boiled and seasoned? C'est bon, c'est bon. In fact, see that house there? A new family, but don't speak nothing but yet. Recipe for a fight, you ask me. Remember Gentilly nights full of old Buddy Bolden hits and heat? Gone. Oh, and that house on Paris and Pratt, Storm took that, and another off Mandeville. Copper got stolen too. For sure, I sat and watched them strip. Man drove a Coupe de Ville for thieving. A throwback. Could have been worse. God could have sent us another white hearse. And I'm going to end with a poem that also has Platonos in it. It just reminds me of the way in which food and immigration and migration are all connected to one another. Abuelito. Rubbed clean like calluses on a praying hand. The office floors my grandpa mopped from sundown to some hell-bent hour, held in obstinate shine. His patron saint, the bald domestic, Mr. Clean. Grandpa scrubbed his tongue with a Brillo pad of commercial jingles, turned TV into a cheap tutor. Weekly bouts with his wife Dolores dulled his shrine of wood grain and cathode ray tube, but not his stare. Where were you last night? What news of San Pedro Sula? Did you buy the Platonos? Many fly-swatting afternoons, he'd sit with his boxers around his ankles into early evening, smelling the oblivion of his own funk, touching and imagining himself a papi chulo. His name like the crank of an engine, a name with grease in the gears. Same as his brothers, the name of a conquistador resistor. One he could not clean, donning instead Carlos, the name he'd given his son like a disinheritance, his own poco colonización, another version of mixing a little dirt from Europe with the mashed plantains. Thank you so much. And now it's my pleasure to welcome Sandra Beasley.
Hi, thanks so much, everyone. Golly, I'm gonna just take a minute and talk about food, talk about cooking, but I'm also just recovering from these amazing readings from Stephen, Naomi, and Alan. What great company of poets to be in. So I'm coming to you from Southwest DC in my actual kitchen with my actual trusty Lodge pot that I used to make huge pots of beans over and over again through the past year and a half. I could not cope with the pandemic through meditation. I didn't do any yoga, but I made beans, meaning that I found that kind of ritualized process of chopping and getting my mise en place, really taking time to do something from scratch, made what seemed like inexplicably large periods of time that I was now here in my kitchen feel useful, feel meaningful. And so I just wanted to kind of celebrate something that, like anybody else in the audience, I have sometimes pulled out of a can on the fly, but also think about what it's like to take a big, beautiful, dried bag of beans, like these Coronas, and just warm them to life through actually doing a full treatment. So I'm just gonna pick a few, and the organizers knew I was gonna do this. I'm not just hijacking this into a cooking show. I'm just going to pick out a few things from the kind of recipe that I gave you all that, like all of the other poets, you're going to get to see at the end here. Just to mention that I recommend using an onion, garlic, peppers. We love spice in this household, so I'll often use like a jalapeno and a poblano, seeds in or seeds out, depends on how brave you are. One thing I do want to mention though is that you might not want to use tomatoes because tomatoes, the acid will actually keep the beans from softening. Salt will not make your beans hard, but tomatoes will. Obviously, it's like an amazing flavor combination, but it's one you only want to do at the end after the beans are cooked. So it's really basic. You make your essentially raw ingredients of what somebody else might buy out of a box of vegetable stock. You want to add a little cumin. If there's one spice I'd tell you to use in making beans, it's cumin, but you don't want to add it at the end and you don't want to add too much of it. So what I usually do is either when I'm cooking the carrots or when I'm cooking the onions, that's when I add it. It kind of keeps it in proportion and makes sure it doesn't overwhelm. Do I soak the beans from scratch or overnight beforehand? No, but what I do is I put them in dry and then I do total coverage with water plus 2 inches of water. And I do, in fact, use one of those bay leaves that you probably have floating around and you wonder if it actually makes a difference. It does. And what you want to do is do a hard boil on these. Depending on the size of the bean, 5 minutes, with the biggest beans, 15 minutes. So that hard boil will do a lot of the work that an overnight soak would have done, and it means you don't have to plan as much. So you do that. Bring it back down to a simmer after it's had its boil, and you wait and you wait. You can expect a big, beautiful pot of beans to add warmth and wonderful smells and kind of atmosphere to the house, but it might take them 1 hour, 1.5 hours, even 2 hours. I swear it'll be worth it. One last thing. In our household, I like to finish with hot sauce. You do what you want, but we like it spicy here. This seems like a natural segue to a poem called In Praise of Pintos. Phaseolus vulgaris, forgive these mottled punks. Children burst from the piñata of the new world and their ridiculous names of Lariat, Kodiak, Othello, Burke, Sierra, Maverick. Forgive these rapscallions that would fill the hot tub with ham while their parents go away for the weekend just to soak in that salt. Forgive their climbing instinct. Forgive their ignorance of their grandparents who ennobled Rome's greatest, Fabius, Lentulus, Pisa, Cicero, the chickpea. Legume is the enclosure, fruit in pod, but pulse is the seed. From the Latin, pulse is to beat, to mash, to throb. Forgive that thirst, forgive that gallop. Beans are the promise of outlasting the coldest season. They are a wink in the palm of God. This next poem starts with the absolutely true story of how tater tots came to be an amazing product that if you haven't had yet, I urge you to go out and find yourself a batch of as soon as this production is over tonight. It's a celebration of a family business that you may have heard of called Ore-Ida. But of course, like most poems, it starts out being one thing and then becomes about another. Heirloom. Lo, 12 children born to a woman named Thankful in Nampa by the border between Oregon and Idaho, or as it will be remembered, or Ida. Lo, 2 of her sons drive to Miami, not knowing if their plan will work. Lo, what were once waste scraps fed to the cows, now repackaged. The fry shavings sliced, spiced, and oiled. Lo, a chef at the Fontainebleau takes the bribe. Lo, tater tots are dished onto the tables of the 1954 National Potato Convention and soon enshrined in the freezers of America. 3 decades later, the golden age of my childhood is a foil-lined tray plattered with Ore-Ida product, maybe salt, maybe nothing but hot anticipation of my fingertips. Lo, my mother is a great cook, and lo, my grandmother is a terrible one, but on the tinfoil plains, they are equal. I need you to understand why my father will never enjoy an heirloom tomato, glistening, layered in basil. Put away your brandy wines, your Cherokee purples, your green zebras. Lo, as with spinach, as with olives, he tastes only the claustrophobia his mother unleashed from cans to feed 4 children on a budget. We talk little of this. Lo, what is cooked to mush. Lo, what is peppered to ash. Lo, the flavor rendered as morning chore, that this too is a form of love. If I'd gotten to do my original plan, you'd have found me here with like bacon sizzling in the pan. Unfortunately, that would have created a lot of background noise, and my cat, Sal, probably would have busted in and like kind of bombed the camera at some point. So sadly, the bacon I have in hand is only still frozen. It is Benton's bacon, straight from Tennessee. Alan Benton is the man, 3rd generation pork and ham guy, and I literally get this in the mail. It comes through the mail, and we feast off of it. I can smell the wood smoke just holding it up. Why am I flashing you bacon? Because of this next and last poem. It's a poem called The Vow. The first couple of lines you will hear are from Chaucer, actually, who says, "But never for us the flitch of bacon, though, that some may win in Essex at Dunmow." The Vow. But never for us the flitch of bacon, though, that some may win in Essex at Dunmow. So promises the old wives' tale, a covenant according to Chaucer, that if tomorrow I trek to Dunmow Church and swear before God and congregation, no fights, not a single quarrel, in 366 days, not even once wishing to be unmarried to you, that hog is ours for the taking. My love, what limp victory that would be. Sweet silence of perfect agreement as we swing a pork trophy between us, walking the many miles home, the fatback won, the battle lost. I reserve my right to a good spat, to the meat's spit in flame. I take joy in choosing you again and again. Thank you all so much. We're going to go to Susan and hear some questions. I'm just so delighted to be spending this time with you all.
Thank you, everybody. And now we laughed about this irony earlier that we started a rehearsal at 6. And so the irony is we're talking all about food, but none of us have eaten dinner yet. So we're all very hungry. And all these poems made me truly, my mouth is watering. So we have a bunch of questions, but we'd love some more. I wanted to ask one of all the poets, and I'm going to ask if all the poets could turn their cameras and their microphones on. Thanks. Cool. So imagine if we read poetry 3 times a day, as much as most of us eat. Would we be more fulfilled? And why is there so much food-related poetry? And you can jump in if you want to answer that.
I'll just say for me, I mean, food makes me very happy. And my wife knows that because every time I write a new poem and I read it to her, I'm not thinking food, I'm thinking about something else. And my wife is always like, oh, food again. But it's, I think for me, well, not just for me, but I think food for a lot of people is a way of like coming together. You meet somebody for coffee, you meet somebody for dessert, you have a feast to celebrate something, so everything seems to center around food. And I don't know, I think it's something about being satiated with some good food. It just enhances whatever moment it is you're celebrating or that you're experiencing.
Yeah, I think to kind of extend that, I too, like Alan, like to eat. So I think Phil, that food is a kind of place of public memory, right? It kind of contains both like a family history. It kind of looks into the future and what might be passed on. It evolves over time, and so I think poets might be naturally drawn to that because language does the same thing. Like language is a kind of a place of public memory that evolves. So I think it has to do with recognizing that there's a metaphor there for how we participate in the world and how we participate with language.
I so appreciated hearing from Sandra her tips about beans. I just made some butternut squash stew with beans. I just little pink beans, habichuelas rosadas, which you can substitute for pinto beans in Chile if you're making Chile. And I love the process of cooking. For me, the energy inside in my physical body, I touch what I love to cook, and I get energy from that. It feels like making a poem to me. And I like eating a lot. I think about food all the time, but I enjoy cooking it as the whole process of preparing for it and shopping for it. Yeah, very closely linked to poetry for me and culture.
Yeah, I mean, I really do think of food, making food as a meditative space. And 20 years ago, it wasn't me cooking beans from scratch, but it was me as a graduate student standing there with like whatever that year's best American poetry was and doing steel cut oatmeal in the mornings. And I could usually get through like 2, maybe 3 poems, like through a batch of steel cut oatmeal, which has to be stirred and attended to and waited out. I just, this is not an intended cameo, but I've got one of my mother's artworks out of the corner of my eye. It's hanging over the sink. And I remember that during periods of her life where she really couldn't get the time to be in the studio, her food would tend to grow proportionately more elaborate, like her salads in particular became canvases. And I think we have to think about multiple ways of being creative in the world. Otherwise we just can get stretched thin so quickly. So I'm on board with everyone. And obviously I love to eat.
So Lucille Clifton, I don't know if you guys know this, but Lucille Clifton loved food, but did not like to cook. And she had 6 children, that were 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. And so she hated cooking. She really did. And the other thing she didn't approve of were condiments. There were never ketchup, no mayo, nothing. I know, not even hot sauce. I know, but that's how Lucille ate. But one of my favorite poems of hers is called Cutting Greens. Does anyone know that one? I love that one. It talks about,
Yeah.
I pulled it up because what everybody was saying in this first, and about this first question about the connection between family and food and poetry. In this poem, she's cutting greens, and she says, the greens roll black under the knife, and the kitchen twists dark on its spine, and I taste in my natural appetite the bond of live things everywhere.
Mm.
Oh, no,
Mhm.
just you're right. It's a connection. Food is a connection. I mean, obviously, we take food in as sustenance and turn it into art because
Mhm.
that's what we think about. Laura had a great question. She asked Alan particularly, but I think it's applicable to most people. Obviously, I've heard a lot of family in there. She says, I love that your poems about foods are also poems about the people you love. And she asks, what foods would your friends and families associate with you? And we could maybe go around and ask that question because I think it's a good one for everybody.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, it's funny. So my household, my daughters get a lot of curry. It's my mom passed a lot of her recipes down to me. So, I'm cooking from memory, but it's my way of passing on, Trini culture to them. They get the foods, and then on their mother's side, they get the Nigerian dishes and all of that stuff. But yeah, so definitely in the household, curry. Whenever my mother-in-law lives with us, so whenever she's trying to cook something or try to use curry, she always calls me over to taste it, make sure everything is seasoned right before she continues. So in the household, curry, anything curry, beef, potatoes, whatever. But my friends, folks outside of my household, know I have a weakness for pizza. So I know pre-pandemic, Derek and I was hitting up the C's buffet hard, but so I'll stop there.
I don't know what food people associate with me. They definitely associate me with cooking, though. I think close family and intimate friends who are also Puerto Rican, even though I have a melting pot in my life, if they say, guess what I have? The first list that goes down my mind would be patitas, rice with pigeon peas, something that is so home that you make every day. And with Puerto Rican food it doesn't reheat very well, so it needs to be fresh. So there's something so enticing about that. I think people mostly associate me with cooking, and I do make curries and all kinds of stews, and I try more now this past couple of years since the pandemic, especially, to follow the seasons a little bit more in terms of what I eat, to be guided a little more closely by that.
I really like that. Yeah, because honestly, the farmers market here in Southwest was one of our only sources of groceries when everything was shut down. I never, so I have a ton of food allergies, which is always funny because I write about food. I edited a book of poems about food, but I also have often experienced food as something that can leave me out or even like endanger my ability to do something. So I mention that because if you were to ask like my friends or people who traveled with me, they would tell you that they associate me with French fries because that's usually my safe food. It's very unlikely I'm going to come and go from a place and not try their French fries. If you ask my students, they'll tell you bacon. And the reason why was we were in a low residency program where we had this buffet that was available to start our day. It was one of the only things we would get a chance to eat until about 1. And the only thing I could safely, consistently eat on the buffet was bacon. And so like I would show up with my cup of coffee and then the identical same cardboard cup full of bacon. And that would be like how I could start things. In terms of home cooking, one cannot live on beans alone. I love to do a chicken pozole verde. So usually with like tomatillos, cilantro, green peppers of all different varieties of sweet and spicy, and that hominy is really the key that pulls that together. Yeah.
So for me, in an answer that will surprise no one, it's gumbo. Like it's just like I had the privilege of growing up in a family where like everyone cooked and everyone cooked well. In fact, my mother, who has two other sisters, was probably the worst cook of the three. And like, so I went to other people's houses like growing up, and I'd be like, what do you mean y'all don't cook? Like I didn't, it was so foreign to me. And so then as I aged and as members of my family started to pass, as my grandmother passed, and when I moved to Maryland, I realized if I wanted to have those pieces of New Orleans, those pieces of Gulf culture with me, I had to learn how to make it myself. It's everybody knows when it starts to get cold in the house, when the season starts to change, about the time we hit November, a gumbo is coming, at some point. So it's really that. And what I love about it so much is you can't rush it. It's a meal that is like full of everything that's left over, right? Everything that you can put in there, but there's no way to make it quickly. You have to take your time. And that is frustrating when you're cooking it when you're hungry, but so pleasurable when you get the results at the end. It's that.
One thing that's regionally really special about this conversation and this kind of cohort of poets is that a lot of us maybe have family or started out in the further American South and then came, like, it's kind of like you get about this far and it's like, nope, can't go any farther north, too cold. And so you have this like crux. I was thinking about that with Lucille Clifton and the collard greens, like the ways that actually Southern tradition, American South traditions of cooking can be really and not just American South, but but just can be really fiercely maintained and celebrated here, because it's like the thing from home that we're holding on to, that we brought with us. I really, really wanted to include that Lucille Clifton poem in this book. That's why I know it so well, but couldn't quite work it out against the matrix of who we decided to include, which was living poets, and how we decided to include them, which was place of residence.
Right. Yeah. No, it's a great poem. And, she wrote short poems because she had so many children. It's short, but it compacts a lot. I love the idea of bringing a slice of culture with you, with your food, with your poems, and the idea of migration and food. They always say America is the melting pot, but I don't feel like that's really the case, because I love that there's so many different disparate shards of food and culture, and that's because of migration. Maybe if someone has any thoughts about that.
I remember when I first moved to DC and how excited I was. And then immediately after expressing my excitement in a number of ways, the question lingered, are there any Puerto Rican restaurants? and the answer was no. And this is something that we ask each other. And then, so no Puerto Rican restaurants. What else is next? Are there any Ecuadorian restaurants? Like, what is there to eat that's Latino food that at least might resonate with a taste of back home in terms of herbs and spices, and then expanding to, of course, the Caribbean. And so it's very interesting, and you gravitate. I think all of us, no matter where we're from, and even elsewhere in the country, tend to associate food with home, being home, and being around those smells and tastes. For me, I just think to not having a wide variety of tubers available around me was something, and not just in DC. I lived in Connecticut prior to DC. So yeah, it's very interesting how we adjust to our environment, starting with food. Yeah.
There's an economic component to it as well, because in order to make the same dish here in Maryland, it can be quite expensive because in Louisiana, the price of seafood is so cheap. Like, shrimp is like $4 a pound. So that's why you can get a po' boy longer than your arm, is because overflowed with shrimp, because it's so cheap. Like, good luck trying to find, that's a supreme sale at Safeway. If you could find, shrimp at $4 a pound.
You don't want the $4 a pound shrimp up here.
No, you do not. So I think about that too, about that migration makes it's not even about sometimes like not being able to get all the ingredients that you need, but also the way in which it costs you something different. That moving, is always a reckoning with loss, and trying to maintain it in various ways. But I'm often just thinking about, my grandma was making this for this price, and I'm making it for this paycheck. So yeah, I'd like to think about that in terms of migration as well.
Very good. So Diane has a question. She writes, Hafiz says, today the vegetables would like to be cut by someone singing God's name. And she says, do you beautiful medicine men and women have a special blessing for meals? A reminder that we are blessed to have food.
I say thank you. It's very hard for me to this day to take that for granted, because growing up, it took our whole family to produce a meal. And from what it took to just even get yuca regularly and to make rice, and the amount, like every ingredient, and wash it and rinse it and cut. And so it's like a song, it's a dance, and it involves so many people. It's hard for me to cook and think about food without thinking of others. People I've cooked with throughout my life, and it's such a great equalizer for me. Like, men, when I was growing up, didn't share in a lot of household stuff, but when it came to cooking, they could cook as well as women did, and them taking over the kitchen was always something memorable for me. So I say thank you. Before I sit to have the first bite, it's a silent blessing of gratitude.
Yeah, part of our prayer when we're blessing food, part of it is always giving thanks for like the means, which the food came to our table. We never take that for granted, that there had to be some sort of process to bring these goods to us. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
I think that we don't practice in traditional prayer, but as I've said a few times, I do think of food very much in terms of ritual. And I think my husband is like both charmed and slightly annoyed that I am very consistent in asking him to put on records while I cook. It probably feels like I'm tasking him with his share of the labor, but it's not just that I want him to play DJ, although he's a very good DJ, and we have an awful lot of vinyl in our apartment. But it's also that it's kind of part of the blessing of the meal for me. It's part of what makes it feel celebratory and not like drudgery. And so that's really important. What's funny is the actual eating, that might be zoned out in front of the TV, whatever, but the creation of the meal, that I really want and need to feel like a good space, and that involves him queuing up some music every time.
So my family, everybody in the family watches a lot of anime. So sometimes when we are being, playful, we do what is like essentially a Shinto a prayer that they use in anime all the time, ikitakimasu, which is like often translated like "thank you for the food," but that's mostly playing. Like, it's mostly just playing, and often it's around those big meals around holidays when we take the time to think about a blessing, or do the sort of things of holding hands and bowing our heads and those sorts of things. So it's much more either playful or annual for us. But always, the big thing for us often is that everybody in those moments that are like holiday meals, everyone has to do something. Everyone has to contribute. something. So kids are starting the rice, or preparing something. Someone's cutting the sausage, or cutting the green peppers. That idea that everyone help make it so everyone can help eat it is part of that like kind of prayer that we try to enact.
So we have a request. We have a request to hear one more poem each. So if anyone has a poem that they'd love to read, whether it's about food or not, we'll maybe think about that for a minute. And then there's one, HoCoPoLitSo, I assume that's one of our folks, is saying one of the interesting things about grocery store food is that we share food with the neighborhood. Somewhere across town, some family is eating the other half of the salmon, or maybe it's the bunch of carrots that still hold the hands that pulled them from the ground. Food ties us to things. And then there's a bacon tip that just came through on our chat too, about Benton's Smoky Mountain Country Hams. Thank you, Sandra, for the bacon tip.
Right, I swear, Southern Foodways Alliance gave me a few like inside tracks on things, and Benton's, I mean, he's just packing the ham himself. It's amazing.
Awesome. Well, I have to say, as a vegetarian, bacon is one thing that I do miss. Yeah. Okay, so let's see. Does anyone have a poem that they might be able to pull out?
Yeah, I could read. Yeah.
Great.
So who wants to go first?
Let's go in the order that we went in in the program.
All right. So yeah, I'll just read this piece. It has food in it. I can't help it. But this is another poem for my wife. Gluttony. Combing the bargain bin. A woman who's not your wife brushes beside you, asking if the Roy Hargrove CD you're holding is any good. She's close enough for you to smell her ginger patchouli body wash. The angle she gives you in her leather bomber jacket, the one unzipped showing a white tee retracing her athletic stomach and arms, the jacket with its collar flared, makes her a bright blossom booming its honeydew scented tune along her neckline. And your father's voice from 2 decades before warns you about gorging on everything you see. You were 16 the first time he told you, when your hunger hovered like that summer at Myrtle Beach, sisters strutting the boardwalk beneath a honey barbecue sun whose sweet light made each of them a long stretch of marinade, a chromatic scale of flavors along which your tongue was burning to play. And isn't temptation always lurking, eager to hold our common sense hostage? You tell the flower woman you're married after she points to a flyer for a Roots show and says y'all should go. When she asks, are you happy? You remember a brother once asking how you could love one woman when the world's a buffet, the possibilities of pleasure laid out like jumbo crab cakes, lasagna rolls, and buffalo wings. What's gluttony if not a symptom of our own hunger consuming us? Wasn't Jack as careless selling his sustenance for a handful of beans? You remember the story of the stalk that almost made him a hungry giant's grub. You still hear the pastor preaching about gluttons wearing the rags of drowsiness, which is how your wife found you, stumbling through the days. Your life before her was a stringless violin, a dark garden of wilted sunflowers, a camper trailer rusting against a moldy brick wall. You were once a city of power lines, boarded up clock towers, junked cars, and blazing drum barrel fires. What she saw in you Only her heart knows. Just like it knew you'd leave the temptress back at the listening booth, watching the automatic doors close behind you. At 16, you thought all there was to living was filling your appetite. Too young to know love is the everyday meal, that the lack of it kills quicker than the absence of food.
Wow. Thank you, Alan. And thank you who asked for us to read another poem. I'm glad I got to hear this one.
Yeah.
Powerful. I just pulled this up and I'd forgotten I'd written it. So, and there's Spanish in it. Tiene que ser, it has to be. Goya is the the ad tagline for Goya. Tiene que ser. It's got to be Goya. Adobo Goya. Adobo del alma. The seasoning blend of life in my Thai cooking, Italian escapades, and the simplest eggs, all the pasteles of Mommy's kitchen, the 24-hour pig marinades, winter time and spring in my asopao, my arroz con gandules, first escort to cilantro, aguacate, before all the sofritos of my life.
I love it. I love it. Naomi mentioned earlier about yuca and fried yuca. I could eat it right now, like, put everything else aside. I don't care, and I so rarely get to even experience it unless I'm with my family from Honduras. I'm actually going to read a poem that's a little bit more somber that I think uses food to take on ways in which we can think about despair. And it's called Blame. And it came like a wet pig's snout, seeking the brush for the last truffle, the growing gnaw that you were not good enough. You did not have an Atlantic to cross. You did not have a trauma anyone was buying. Your tongue grew banal as a calm sea. Eyes you dreamed were artillery had their hoods drawn over. You weren't worthy of a stray bullet. In the fitfully coy Maryland winters, you saw an unused sepulcher. You thought of the cut marble the pallbearers slid your grandmother in. You thought of licking the bacon grease from a used pan when the fridge was barren. You thought of playing spades on the hood of a car and losing a few books, going blind. Nothing was to blame but your own imagination. You have no place to come back from. No one calls it a comeback when you start from the bottom and return, like a muddy nose that can't stop sniffing the pot of cleaned greens and hocks cooking for the new year. How many years without a single black-eyed pea before the ancestors cease to weep? How many entrails must you eat?
So good, so good. This is a short little poem. I'll just mention that it has a certain eeriness for me because it's got two levels of before and after. One is that the beans in this poem are frozen, which speaks to a reality of pre-pandemic. And the other is that it, as I mentioned earlier, I'm in Southwest DC. It mentions our view of the Capitol, which changed considerably in its freight and its weight several times over, but particularly in January of this year. Little love poem. The 6 a.m. sun considers everything, humming its way past the Capitol. I reheat yesterday's coffee, put lima beans into a pot, Ford hook, always Ford hook, drizzle of olive oil, pinch of salt, shake of chili flakes. The chicken broth comes to boil for a minute before I cover, simmer. Soon he'll wake and I'll ask him to put a record on, something with no words, bowls, spoons, a single twist of pepper.
Yeah, the gift that making food for other people and being made food um, is a tremendous gift. I tend to think of the people who are making and picking our food because they don't get a lot of love. um, all right, so oh, Mary Kay, who says she's missing the book signing part of the evening. I know. I know. I love that's one of my favorite things that is missing from the pandemic is the lining up and chatting with the other people in line and chatting with the poet as they sign your books. I really miss that. Was someone else, Laura says, if this were an in-person event, these four poets would be cooking on stage too. Yeah, that would be great. Mm. So was poetry, along with the rituals of cooking, was poetry something that sustained you during this pandemic?
We're all like, shall we unmute? I think, yeah. I mean, yeah. But I want to be clear. That doesn't mean that I was just home with my feet up in my fuzzy PJs, like cooking all the live one day. Like this has been a hard time for folks, and I don't want, I can celebrate and also acknowledge that the times that I did get to slow down and have these days of cooking, that was a privilege, and it was not one that was always the case for me, and it was certainly not the case for a lot of folks, right? So yeah, I mean, I would say poetry and food saved me, but we also got to save each other, and I'm working on that. I think we all are.
I think in the context, I agree with that because yeah, we sometimes we have these images of authors and poets and what their lives might be like, and all of a sudden we're here. This group in particular this evening are also cooks. I think for me my relationship with food definitely was altered, and I've always been grateful for it. I know what it's like to dig yucca myself, and if growing up, if we needed a chicken, you had to kill it. Somebody had to kill it and unpluck the feathers, and so there's that intimacy that you don't. Alan was talking, gluttony came up as an extended metaphor in his poem. And that's kind of hard when you're like right there earning what you eat. For me, I felt like I was doing it in a different way. I had to receive food instead of shop for it. That was a big no-no for me. It was a huge adjustment. And then, I'm immunocompromised, so I had to disinfect everything. And that just, it really altered my relationship to how I came to it. But the ability to be able to make a stew while I worked, whether it was on writing or doing something else, or communicating with people that I normally would not communicate with, while everyone was in their own brand of isolation, made it all the more special. It made food the privilege that it is, in many ways, not just getting it, but cooking it and making something that keeps you healthy while the world is falling apart in terms of health, from the Mother Earth all the way to us.
Yeah, I'll say that, pre-pandemic, I always enjoyed cooking. I think Naomi talked about enjoying the process of it, enjoying the process of shopping for food. And for me, the process is even more, it's even heightened when I'm in an international market and I'm going and gathering my stuff. I feel like a wizard getting ready to cast this spell. But anyway, during the pandemic, I mean, we did do a lot of cooking, but my family, we want, like we had gotten COVID. And so, we're fortunate that we pulled through it. But one of the things that messed me up was, when I'm cooking and like I said earlier that a lot of the recipes were passed down to me from my mom. So like I can't, if somebody asks me for measurements and stuff like that, I can't give you measurements because I'm just going from feel, like what I have been doing all these years. But like I I was cooking for my 5-year-old, and it's a dish that I nail every time. But one of the symptoms of COVID is that you lose your taste. So like I tasted, it tasted okay to me, and so I served it to her, and she came to me, and I mean, she was very thoughtful. She was like, she considered my feelings, and then she was like, "Daddy," I said, "What's up, Jazz?" She was like, "Can you add? Could you put flavor in this?" Like that was so crushing. I was like, "Oh," But I will say, to come back to that question, like I think for us, like it was food, but it was also like our household. Everyone like pulling through. Like our symptoms, and just us being together helped help sustain us. Like yeah, my kids. Well, yeah, Jasmine drove me crazy, but at the same time, it was also great for us all to be together, and yeah, yeah.
I think for me, part of the pandemic was visiting schools as the writer in residence. That was such a lovely and an experience I wouldn't trade for anything, to be able to talk about with high school students and students all over the county, just my own just sort of deep curiosity and love poetry. But I will say that there are many painful things related to poetry too, so I can't quite say that it was sustaining, because I had to reckon with the way in which having a book come out in 2020 meant certain things, and that the literary community moves on very fast, and so you get one book, your book is only 1 year old for 1 year, and many of the plans that I had for travel and the 7 years that I worked on the book to get it published, I had all these grand plans, about what it would mean to finally have this moment. And, a lot of the pandemic was about trying to negotiate when was okay to communicate my grief about that. Because, in the end of the day, nobody in my immediate family was sick. People that in my circle hadn't died. I often felt like, what do you have to complain about? Some people don't have a book. Just be grateful, Stephen. Just be grateful, Stephen. And I found that wasn't enough, because there was a sadness, that I both couldn't resolve and couldn't name, and that felt like the things that got me out of that were, or that kind of kept me from kind of deeper despair, I think were just the small ways in which people reached out and said kind things about the book, that helped me realize, this is a gift too. This is something you can hold on to too. Yeah, you didn't go across the country in an airplane to read to strangers, but the folks that you cared about saw you in the book and celebrated. So, that was what was sustaining for me.
Beautiful. All right. I think we've gotten all the questions answered. And I think that that's a great way to wrap up, is the idea that there's sorrow and there's joy. So thank you, Naomi and Stephen and Alan and Sandra, for the really deep and lovely celebration. As Joy Harjo wrote, perhaps the world will end at the kitchen table while we are laughing and crying, eating of the last sweet bite. So thank you all for joining us for the last sweet bite And stay tuned for bios of the poets and lists of their books and websites and for their recipes. We're also